Hello everybody, welcome along to my channel. My name's Suzanne and I garden and grow cut flowers in Devon in the UK. It's the end of November now, so a lot of you may think I'm jumping the gun a little bit now by getting a little bit festive. But I have at the moment lots of Christmas fairs and markets that I've been going to, and up until now I've been taking lots of dried flower products. But that's all ready to change now, so my next ones, which start at the beginning of December, I'd like to be able to offer some Christmas foliage things. So things like garlands and table centres, and of course door wreaths, which is what we're going to be making today. Now I have made a video where I have made a wreath before, but that one was slightly later in the season. So what I actually did was I made a wreath directly onto a willow base with no source of moisture, and later on in the season a Christmas wreath will hang on a front door very well with no moisture source. This wreath, by the way, is about 6 weeks old now, so I'm not really showing it because it's looking a bit tired. I just made this one for a photo shoot. So anyway, so the wreath we're going to make today, we're going to give a little bit of moisture source because they're going to be expected to last basically for the whole of December and into the new year. Honestly, most foliage that we put into Christmas wreaths is really hardy foliage, and as long as it's kept outside, it will all last very well anyway. If you've ever been for a walk through a forestry where they've been doing forestry works and they've cut limbs off of trees and left them there, it takes an awful long time before they start to look tired. They look really fresh and healthy for a really long time. But because I'm going to be selling these wreaths, I want to make sure that I give the foliage the best chance. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a willow base, and although I quite often use moss, this is moss that I gather from my own fields with a rake. Lovely moss. I will be using this on my table centres. This is a table centre that I've started. But I don't want to be harvesting the quantities from my paddock that I would need to be making wreaths. So I'm in actual fact going to be using hay instead, but you could very easily use straw. It's surprising, you can start with quite a small willow base or laurel or birch, all sorts of bendy twigs you can use to do this. It doesn't have to be willow, but when you actually add the hay on, you do actually make your base much larger, and by the time you have your foliage on, the wreath will be a lovely size for a front door then, hopefully. We're actually going to make a base because I'd like to show you the whole process from start to finish. So I've just been outside, it was raining again, to my cut flower patch, and I've just cut some fresh British willow here. So I will go ahead and cut off all of the side branches from this willow so that we can turn it into the base, and then we'll go ahead and we'll put the hay on it. This is a dry hay ring, and this is one that I haven't submerged it in water because I don't want it to be absolutely sodden. I've just sort of squirted it under the tap with some water. But as I say, we'll show you the whole process. So I'll go ahead and get this willow prepared. I do have one of my first videos when I started my YouTube channel where I go into a lot more detail on actually making these bases. I'm not going to go into quite so much detail here, but I will link that video for you in the description. It is one of the very first videos I made. I was going to say, so the quality isn't marvellous, but actually I'm not really sure the quality of my videos has really improved very much from then on. But as long as you understand what I'm trying to say and the message that I'm trying to get across, then that's fine. I'm doing it sort of right. So these willows now, this is my second year harvesting from these willows, and when I planted them, all I did was actually took a piece of willow from a lovely neighbour that I have, and I stuck it into the soil, and that's all I did, and it rooted, and they're growing on very nicely now into these nice lengths. Some of the fatter ends are a little bit harder to get into shape, and we may end up cutting the really chunky bit at the bottom off, and then I would be able to plant that chunky bit as I had done previously and harvest from that again. Willows like to grow in quite wet land, which isn't a problem for me here. The only trouble is I have to decide what gets priority of space here, animals or growing shrubs and trees and plants. I have decided that I am going to fence off a section of my paddock to plant some large trees. Well, they won't be large when I plant them, but I'm thinking ahead to the future now. I'm thinking that in 20 years they might be large. I've got this lovely rich mahogany colour here. Isn't this beautiful? Sometimes it does seem a real shame to cover up the willow bases, so sometimes I sort of half cover them. That's not what we're doing today. Today I'm going to be making a fully round wreath. I may yet do another video where I do make a half wreath. I think in the run up now up to Christmas there'll probably be fairly Christmassy crafty projects, just because that's predominantly what I'm doing. I'm trying to fit in some gardening. I haven't quite finished planting all of my daffodil bulbs, although I am nearly there. And I've got some crocus bulbs that I desperately need to plant as well. But I just haven't found the time with making all the things, dried flower things to sell. I haven't decided if I'm going to do dry flowers again next year or not. It really is going to depend on how these December markets go. All of these side shoots will get used. I'll be able to use these to make the smaller hoops, rings that I use for my table centres. And we may well do that next week. I don't know, I haven't decided yet. Filming actually next week might be quite difficult because I've got a reef workshop that I'm giving on Saturday, and I've got an all-day Christmas market on the Sunday. So I don't know, hopefully you'll get a video, but I'm not making any promises. Okay, so what I'll do now, I'll just get rid of all of the smaller. These ones are sort of medium. I may put them in, I may not. And then, I don't want this to be a really massive hoop, so we'll sort of have a look at this one. You're going to ask me how big that is. I think when I was using my workshop on a regular basis, I kept a tape measure up there. But because I basically have evicted myself from my workshop until today, everything had been covered up, and that was just because of the condensation in here. But I've got so many dried flower things in my kitchen. My kitchen's not a humongous kitchen. There is no room for making Christmas wreaths in there as well. So did you see how I just manipulated the willow a little bit when I started? And then once you sort of get it to about the right size, you want to, let me just manipulate this fat end a little bit more. We're not going to see this willow base that I make, so it doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to give us that round shape for us to put our hay on. And again, I'm just going to manipulate it a little bit. If I get any bends or kinks in this, it doesn't really matter. So if you are using something like Laurel, you can very easily make a circle with it, and it may bend and kink. But again, because we're going to be covering this with hay or straw, if you've got straw, or if you have got moss, then by all means use moss. There, that's looking a bit rounder. And what you want to do with the next piece of willow that you go in with is you want to go in the same direction and can you see how this piece of willow is under the loop there? You want to do the same here, so you want to put that one under there. I am just going to use a slightly thinner end this time, and I'm just going to, you know, come about 4 inches further up, and I'm going to place that in. And again, I'm just going to manipulate the willow. If you just try and bend it straight away without manipulating it, it's more likely to bend or snap. Okay, and then again, got to be careful it doesn't ping back and take your eye out. Health and safety. And you see, if I was using this base without adding something to retain moisture, I would keep these bits of willow that are sticking out the edge there, because just look at the colour, aren't they beautiful? But they'll unfortunately get wrapped in with the hay in a minute. I've only actually used 2 bits of willow there. I'm going to use 3, I think, but then I think that's going to be ample. I don't think I'm going to need those other bits. And again, I'm just going to take the really chunky end off. And these are the bits you can plant, these chunky bits like this. So we'll keep those. I'll add that to my ever-growing jobs list. Okay, and so then just the same as we have, don't worry, we're going to cut this bit off in a minute. About 4 inches again, further along. Again, putting your willow in the same direction as you have previously, and then manipulating it. Okay, and then I'll just go along now and I'll cut these really chunky bits off as well. Because we're going to cover this in hay, all of these bits that are sticking out will be bound in, so it doesn't really matter. If I were doing a wreath base that was going to be on view, I'd make a bit more of a conscious effort for it to be much neater. I do a lot of dried flower wreaths where I use buff willow, and yeah, they're much neater. The buff willow is a willow that has been kiln dried, so it does mean that you need to soak it. Okay, so now we'll get some hay. Now I use the hay, I put the hay on dry, and then I don't get it wet until I need to actually use it. So just put a bag full of hay here. I mean, you could even, not right now, it's probably a bit late, but you could think ahead, and when you're cutting your lawn in sort of, I don't know, September time, you could even keep your lawn cuttings to dry them out, and then that, I mean, that's effectively what hay is. Because I have livestock, obviously I have a readily available supply of hay. So what I do, this is actually quite good hay, it's a bit more like straw, so it's quite long, rather than some of the meadow hay can be really short, and that'll probably be harder to put on. And I'm just taking it into little sections like this. Just tie, you can use wire, I use twine because I like my wreaths to be 100% biodegradable. So you do have to be careful with twines though. I've now found a supply of twine that I get on with. It's quite a thin twine, and very occasionally it breaks. But I have bought other twines in the past that are just awful and they just break constantly. And that's because during the wreath making process, whether it be now putting the hay on or attaching the foliage, you do have to use quite a lot of tension. I sometimes do this both ways. I'm not sure what the left or right-handed way to do this is, but basically you just are wrapping your twine around the hay, paying the most attention to the outer section of the ring and the top part of the ring. The underneath and the inside don't need to have, you know, such a thick amount of hay, because we don't put any foliage onto the back, and we don't really put any in the middle. We just have it resting over, because at the end of the day you want your wreath to be circular, so you want there to be a hole in the middle, and we'll just keep on wrapping our twine around, and again, like I say, pulling fairly tight. And you can trim your hay, so don't worry too much if you've got lots of really sticky outy bits. Don't worry about that now. We'll get the scissors and give it a bit of a haircut. If your ball unrolls, that honestly is a real nuisance, and I've had to actually re-ball my twine before, because you cannot effectively work with it if it's not balled up. Just gonna do a little bit more there. Try and have sort of an even coverage. If you finish this and you're like, oh, it's a bit thinner here, don't worry, you can always add some more on the top and go around again. There are no rules to how many times you can go around. And again, a bit more there. I think I always, you know, curse the people who start talking about Christmas too soon. But you know, when you listen to the weather that's outside today, perhaps we need to embrace a bit of Christmas spirit, just to lift the mood. You know, we're all lacking in getting our sunshine and our vitamin D at the moment, so perhaps we all need a bit of Christmas. But like I say, perhaps not so much the commercial element of it. That spending time with friends and family, and for me, getting creative. Okay, so there we are. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut my string, but not too close. I want to leave myself plenty for tying. And just find somewhere I can see a bit of willow just here, so I'm just going to fasten onto that bit of willow and just tie any old knot. There's no special knot that I'm going to use. I'm just going to use my scissors to poke it through. Perfect. And then I'm just going to tie a knot. And I'm going to tie it in a knot a couple of times, because I don't want it all to unravel. Okay, there we are. So that's our completely biodegradable wreath ring. And then, as I said, what you can do then is just give your wreath ring a haircut, as long as you don't cut the string anywhere. Obviously cutting the string would undo a lot of your hard work. But as I say, if you're not making your wreath until nearer the big day and it's going to be outside, you can just do the whole process directly onto the willow. And that's how I will be making my wreaths later on in the season. but it is a bit early. Okay, there's a couple of long and straggly bits there. Okay, there we are. So there it is after a haircut. Okay, so then once you've made your wreath base, as I say, you can just, splash it with some water, but I wouldn't advise getting it, soaking wet. Think of moss if you raked it up in the field. It's damp rather than wet. Because I've not been using my workshop, nothing is where it goes. Which is very frustrating because I've got a brilliant, it's not a dustpan brush, it's the bottom of a broom, and it is rather good for cleaning my work table. Okay, there we are. Okay, so what we'll do is we're going to use the wreath base that I've already got damp. Here's one I prepared earlier. And you're going to take your foliage. I will pop a clip in now of the different foliages that I've got in here, because basically where you are among foliage. I'm not going to be using any holly today with the holly berries. I'm going to be saving that, I think, for my workshop. But I am going to be using, so I've got this lovely conifer. That's lovely, and that has a lovely scent to it. And then the ivy, I like the ivy once it's started to form these berries. So you can see there's a few bits, they've only just started to form because we've had such mild weather, but I've managed to source some with the berries on there. Then we've got this lovely eucalyptus to have a different shape of leaf. I actually don't grow this one. This is a bit dry, but you'll be able to see I grow this one, the more blue colour, although that's a bit dry and horrible. But this is courtesy of a friend of mine who has a humongous eucalyptus tree. So I popped over there and cut some of that. Nearly fell out the tree. And then I've ordered some lovely spruce and pine. I ordered 2 different varieties actually, because I wasn't really sure which one I wanted. So this one, I quite often use the backs of this, but this is a very green spruce. But yeah, quite often I will use the backs, because when it's on your door, you can't really tell if it's the back or the front. And then I've ordered this one, which I believe is a type of pine, and that's already got a much bluer colour, and it has slightly fatter, flatter sort of foliage. And then I was going to go out into the garden and cut some box because I love it, but because it's raining and the day is running away with me, we're going to work with what we've got there. I have so many things I've been drying over the season, and again, I'm not going to use many of these today because I'm going to be saving a lot of these for my workshop, but these are just examples of some of the things. Alder is one of my favourites. Now alder likes to grow again in fairly damp places, and this all grows along the river on my parents' property, and I'm very grateful for that because I love it, and there are trees and trees of it. But you get this real purpley tinge to the catkins, and then they have these beautiful little seed heads that are almost like mini pine cones. Bracken, lovely dried bracken. Nigella, love in the mist. Amaranthus, this is a mixture of Ushberg and Red Army. And teasel seed heads, which, now if you're going to work with teasel, again, we're not going to today. I have painstakingly stripped all of the spines off of these for the people coming to my workshop because they are, really, really spiky. So if you're are going to use teasels, that's quite a good idea. And I actually just used a vegetable peeler. Not everybody's cup of tea, but I have some tail feathers, pheasant tail feathers. Beautiful pennycress, poppy seed heads. But actually what we're going to be using today, this is an alder. I believe this is hazel. I will check that. And this has a green catkin, but what I really liked about this was the lichen and the curly sort of texture of it. So we're going to be using this today, so that we've got those colours of the lichen. And I'm going for that sort of more, silvery. I'm not going to have any reds, so that's why I'm not having the berries. So with that in mind, I've also got this lamb's ear, which I again dried in the summer from the garden. So we're going to have those slightly silvery tones. And then I also, I've been trying to find pine cones to buy for my workshop. And would you believe I cannot find British pine cones? But these ones I know are British because I collected them from the floor. But it's much easier to add pine cones to a wreath if you're using wire. If you're using string, it is a little bit more tricky. But we will try and add these with some string at the end. But what we're going to do, we're not going to add any of the dried elements at the beginning now. What we're going to do initially is to cover our wreath now in the greenery, and then we'll add those extra little elements that give it that little touch of luxury when we've finished. So it's a good idea to cut your foliage into usable lengths. Again, I'll show you, in fact, hang on, I will show you. You know, if you start making a wreath and everything's still like this, it takes much longer because you have to work out where you're going to cut everything. You know, for example, here, if I cut this long stem here, that's probably a little bit too long. So I would cut it here, and then I would cut it again here and use this bit separately. Oh, it's very sticky. And again, lovely, lovely scent. So I've already prepared a whole load of foliage back here, roughly to the right lengths, but it's quite possible that we'll have to trim it a little bit as we go. So what I need to do now is find my ball of twine, which I've lost. Oh, there it is. And you want to re-tie your twine onto the base. It doesn't matter where, and again, the knot doesn't matter either. Oh, sometimes I find the twine, that this is when it will do it, when it's near moisture. But I have every faith that it will work because I've done it before. If it snaps during the process of you making the wreath, it's not the end of the world. You just have to tie the two ends of string back together really securely. But as I say, you can use real wire if you like. But for me, it's just to do with the whole thing being biodegradable. So then what you want to do is you want to be quite generous now. We're going to be making bunches of foliage. And I try to add most of the green elements in. As I say, I would have liked to have had some of the box from the garden, but you can't have everything. Okay, and the idea now is that you're going to make a fan, because bear in mind you want to cover the whole wreath, which is quite wide. So a little bunch, which is a fan of foliage, but you don't want it to be, you want it almost to be like your hand. You want it slightly longer and higher at one end and shorter on the opposite side. And that's because the outside of your circle is larger, So you need the longer bits that will reach around the circle, but the inside of your circle is obviously shorter, so you don't want those really long bits on the inside because there isn't really anywhere for them to go. And you want a clear, defined centre to your wreath. So I've got a selection of some things that are quite tall here, and then some things that are much shorter, for, you know, to get my fan shape. So again, as I say, you do want to be quite generous here. And it takes a bit of, you know, practice. That's why it's a good idea to cut lots of foliage first, because this is where you really start concentrating now. And you don't want to be... some of this I'm going to have this way, and some I'm going to have the back. At the back just really pops, you know, look at the difference there. I mean, you can use, there are so many wonderful garden foliages. Pittosporum, that's a brilliant one. I've used Hebe before. Hebe's another good one. So yeah, so quite a generous bunch, longer this way and shorter this way. There's just a little bit of a hole there. I'm just going to add a little bit more eucalyptus, and almost like I'm making a bouquet, I'm just going to thread that in so I get it in the right place. And then that just fills that hole that was there. And I'm just going to pull my inside just down a little bit more, just so that it is short enough. And again, I never know if I work left-handed or right-handed, especially when I'm filming. I may have to move this all around in a minute. But then you lay it on your wreath, but don't put it straight on your wreath like that. You want to lay it so that your long bit is sort of at an angle. So diagonally, lay it diagonally on your base. Make sure your shorter one is on the inside. We are so this way like this, so that your shorter is on the inside and your longer is on the outside. And then exactly the same process. Oh, it smells lovely. Exactly the same process as when you were putting your hay on. You just are going to secure the tips, the stalky bits of the stems of the branches to your hay base. Okay, so that's the first bunch there. And then you're going to go ahead and you're going to make another bunch exactly the same. So slightly longer bits, slightly shorter bits. And it's not the fixing them to the wreath that's the important bit on the end result. It's important to just take your time with your bunches now, so that they're right before you put them on, so that you definitely got that fan shape where it's shorter on one side and longer on the other. And then what you want to do now is you want to make sure you're covering your bind point here, but don't completely put it right on top of what you've just done, because then you won't see it. So again, lay it diagonally, but just to cover the bind point like that. Okay, and then exactly the same again, you're going to bind that on, pulling firm enough to make sure it's secure, but yeah, not so firm that you're gonna break it. And I just decided my shorter bit wasn't quite short enough then, so I just pulled him down a bit. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do a bit more. You can add your dried elements now in exactly the same way as you're adding these elements, but I just like to add it at the end, because I suppose you've got a bit more artistic control. I mean, I've done both ways, that you can easily do it either way. And then diagonally exactly the same, covering your bind point, and then wrapping with your twine or your wire. It's quite important to have different leaf shapes as well as different leaf colours, which is why I really wanted to get some box, because obviously it's got these really tiny leaves. And that's why the shape of the eucalyptus leaf is great, because it's a real contrast. I'm not making every bunch the same. Sometimes if I want a wreath to look really uniform, I'll put exactly 2 pieces of fir, exactly 2 pieces of eucalyptus. But I'm actually doing this really randomly. Okay, so we've got a bit of eucalyptus on it. And again, sometimes I'm using the back of the spruce there, and sometimes I'm using the inside. So exactly the same again, diagonally over. I am tending to put the eucalyptus on top of something because it is a much floppier leaf, and if you put it at the back it will tend to not stay quite rigid enough. Now he's no good there because he's got this hanging out bit there, but what I can do is I can actually cut that off, and I can still then add it in, and I can just add it in lower down. So again, the fan shape longer here, shorter here. And you'll notice I am just trimming the stems so they're all roughly the same length. It's much easier to get a good coverage of your wreath if you're generous with your foliage. If you skimp on it a little bit, then it will just take you much longer to make the wreath as well. I just need someone perfect. But you can see, how small the willow ring that we started with, how big the wreath will be. You really don't need a huge ring to start with. And you can use metal rings and reuse them every year. I mean, I definitely started, I remember I started with Laurel, and I started making, my mum asked me one day when I was, still at school, would I make a wreath? And I'd never made a wreath before. And we're going back here, folks. I couldn't go online. There wasn't an online then. So I had to just, honestly, just work it out for myself. How did we manage? And I'm sure the first wreath I made was terrible. But your mum's not going to tell you it's terrible. I wonder if that bit is going to be just a little bit too long. Yeah, it is. When you're making cuts to your foliage, you want to cut at an angle. Because I've cut that at that angle, I can still use this little piece of foliage and you won't see that cut. Whereas if I had have cut the other way, can you imagine if you just had that horrible white bit sticking out? So it's important, and of course it doesn't matter that the angle is different this way because this is about to get covered up. Silly little things like that about getting the cuts right, they're all the things that really make a difference. because we've used a base, as in the hay or moss, whatever you've used, it's actually quite handy as well, because if we don't like the shape of our wreath when we've finished, we can actually very easily make a sharp point to our foliage, as we're going to with our dried elements, and just stab them into the hay without having to undo all of our hard work. And you can adjust, your bunch if it's not quite fan-like enough. You can just move the stems around, just like you would if you were making a bouquet. Just a point on foraging here. I don't want to sound like the foraging police. But I've actually paid for quite a lot of this foliage because I'm selling these wreaths. If you're making your own wreath, it's probably a little bit different. But because my intention is to sell these wreaths, I have to make sure I have traceable source of where these products came from, because you're not allowed to just cut things out of hedges without permission. As long as you have got permission, then it's fine. But yeah, you're not just allowed to go and cut things willy-nilly from wherever you like. So I've bought and paid for most of this foliage, and then other foliage has been friends or family, people that are more than happy for me to go and help myself. And one even held the ladder, so thank you, Joe, for holding the ladder. I just want to pull some of my eucalyptus down a little bit. Oh, I nearly lost my ball of string. So I'll just show you how we're coming along there, so you get an idea. I'm going to need a little bit more contrast, I think. We're still okay at the moment, but in a minute we're going to start getting close to where we started, where things start to get a little bit trickier. And you do just have to start lifting away your first bunch so that you don't accidentally tie that back in. I think we'll get one more bunch in a minute. So this is now a bit fiddlier, because every time you put your wire or your twine through, you want to make sure you're not damaging any of the work you've already done. And it is a bit fiddly. Especially with these long eucalyptus leaves that are poking out everywhere. Okay, so it'll be one or two more bunches to finish now. Okay, there we are. Yes, so what I'm going to do now, I'm afraid I don't have a film crew or anybody else filming, so this is where it's a bit difficult. So you can just see the base here. Okay, so I'm going to do exactly the same thing, but this time I'm going to be tucking my new last bunch underneath the first bunch. And then, yeah, this is going to be very, very tricky to tie. So you just want to, yeah, get your way in amongst the leaves. I think I'm going to need one more bunch actually. A little mini bunch. Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to need one more bunch just to hide my workings a little bit more. But this one, I don't want to be, if anything, I just want really quite a small bunch. I really like the eucalyptus having these little seed pods on. Yeah, so we've got a really little bunch now. Okay, and this one is just going to be to try and cover okay. Okay, so there we are. So that's the shape we're left with. I will give it a bit of a trim in a minute if there are any leaves that are sort of hanging into the centre that we don't like. Equally, if it's not an even circle, as I said, we can always add some stems in, but that's the basic wreath shape at the moment. And so what we need to do now, don't panic, you can turn your wreath upside down, is cut the string. Again, I'm leaving myself plenty of length. These scissors are not great for cutting string. And then you just want to tie lots of nice tight knots around. I'm basically finding a bit of twine that's already gone all the way around the base. And I do many knots. And if you've done a good job and you've tied it really tight the whole way, this won't be easy. Okay, and then I'll cut that off. I'm going to cut that off because it would be tempting to use that to hang the wreath, but you really don't want to hang the wreath from an integral part that's holding it all together. We'll hang the wreath from a completely separate piece of string or wire. Okay, so I'm just having a look, and I'm fairly happy with the shape. Sometimes it is easier to put it down on the floor to have a look at it, which I might do a moment. Or even I find that if I hang something up and then I take a photograph of it, I can quickly see everything that's wrong with it, but sometimes I can't see myself. But no, this is fairly well balanced, so I'm quite pleased with that. So let's clear our workspace again. Yeah, so I was thinking the lamb's ear, that sort of silvery colour, and I was definitely thinking these twiggy bits here. Oh, they're so bent, just because look how curly and lovely they are. And then possibly these pine cones, which have got the sap on them that's almost gone white like snow. I don't believe in sort of, don't get me wrong, you can do it, it's fine. I don't like spraying things. I like to use their natural colours, and yeah, these have got this lovely little white tips to them. But again, as I said, these are going to be hard with string, so I might not be able to do it, because what you can do with wire is you can essentially wrap it around and make a stem and then just stab it in. With string, it means wrapping it around, and what you don't want to do is accidentally tie in any of the foliage, which is all nice and open and bushy. So we'll leave those for a minute while I think about it. But I'm hoping that if we cut a nice sharp point to the statues, that we might be able to get it. I don't know if I need a piece this long actually, but it's really important when you're adding these elements to work in the same circle that you have been, to make sure it's all facing the same way. You wouldn't want to go in now and put something facing that way, because it would just sort of ruin the whole circle shape. And as I say, because we've used the hay, we can do this. If I had have just done it with the willow, you wouldn't then be able to go along and do this. I've also got, but I don't know if I'll be able to get it to work, this lovely grass. That, just think of that colour on there. Wouldn't that be lovely? But I've only got very few bits, so I'm not sure if I'll be able to use that or not. So yeah, so I'm just gonna, and as I say, you could have added this with the tied bunches, but I'm just choosing to add the dried elements separately. That one snapped. Make sure you hold it as near the bottom as you can. If you held it right up here, they all bend and snap as you're putting them in. Yeah, you want to get as close down to the hay as you can until you feel it's nice and secure. Sometimes you have to try several different spots because there might be a stem in the way. Snap that one again. A bit sharper. Moss is much easier for getting things into. The hay is fine, it just takes a bit more practice. And I'm doing the lancet all sort of at different lengths, some longer bits, some shorter bits, so that it looks natural. What I want to avoid is it looking really uniform, because that's not my style. There's nothing wrong with that style. It takes, you know, it's a skill in itself. But I like things to be a bit more wild. And so they look like they just grew like that. This one's got a bit of a bend in it, so again, I'll make sure I place it to utilise that bend. As with all my bouquets, sort of 3s and 5s, so if I've got the middle here, I'm going to have 3 bits of the lambs here, and that'll be enough. And I can just see, I'll tell you what's really good if you're using holly. If you can see a bit of twine, holly is brilliant because of the leaf shape at covering up bits of twine, but I'm not using holly, so I'm going to have to find something else just to cover my little bit of twine. I can see it's such a tiny bit. And then if you are going to have to stick a bit of foliage in, what I would do is I would just strip the leaves from the lower part of the stem, cut it into a nice sharp point, and then you can just stick that into the hay. You'll feel if it's gone or if it's not going. Like this bit's not going, so we're going to go even sharper. There. And when it goes, you know, it just, you're like, oh yeah, it went perfect. I think I might keep that bit as a multi-stemmed bit. change the angle of that a little bit. Right, how much white is that? A bit more up here. I call it white, but it's not really white anymore. It's sort of browny, dirty colour. But some dried elements, even though up close, they might have that sort of dirty look. Once you actually put them into something like this, they really lift it. And because the light levels are totally different this time of year, especially when something's being hung outside as well, you don't notice if something's got a little bit of brown on it or not. Some things that have gone brown, like the bracken, for example, it's not supposed to be brown, but it looks lovely. We'll do my twiggy bits next. That's the bit I'm looking forward to. But I've just noticed another bit of string. Oh. There, perfect. Right, so I think that's enough of the lambsy for now. We'll see what we can do with some of these pine cones. But yeah, if you're happy to use wire, then that's definitely the best thing to do. I'll have a go at one, and if I can't get it to look right, then I'll admit defeat. So I'm just going to cut a length of string. And then your pine cones, once they've opened, if they're closed, by the way, just put them somewhere warm, and they will soon open up. But where they release the seed, you should be able to tie your piece of string in, and I tie just a normal knot. Like so. And I like to put my pine cones in little sort of bunches. So I'm just going to add another one. 3, again, 3s, 5s, odd numbers I like to do. Just making sure you get inside. Because if you get right inside, where, the flaps, if you like, where they open up to release the seeds, you can't then actually see the string once you're right inside here. So I'm just going to add another one here. I'm just going to wrap around there and tie. Sorry, you can't see what I'm doing now. This is what I mean about my amateur videos. Okay, so then I've got my bunch of pine cones, and I'm going to try, but this is, as I say, I don't want to flatten or damage any of the foliage I've already got. So you'd have to get your string right underneath all your foliage. I'll show you what it looks like in a second, and you can decide whether it's worth. I think I like it, but I just need to tie it off in a minute. And we'll do that again a couple of times. Okay, so there are my 3 pine cones just there. Yeah, we'll do a few more pine cones, and then we'll do my favourite bit, twiggy bits. I love a twiggy bit. It was funny actually, I hadn't gone to collect twiggy bits, but my dad was doing some hedging. He had some escapee sheep. So he'd laid the hedge, which meant branches that I previously would have never been able to reach. I would have needed a ladder like I did for the eucalyptus. It was right there at eye level. So how could I not snip it? So I'm going to do exactly same again. Gosh, these pine cones are really lovely. Might have to go for a walk. Oh, I don't know if I've got time before my next market. It's not local to me. Where I got these I can get the larch pine cones very easily. These ones, these are everywhere. I mean, they have their merit, but for me, they're so close to a teasel in sort of shape and colour, and because a teasel's already got a stem on it, I just find a teasel just makes more sense to use than the large pine cone. I've got these giant pine cones. I'm hoping to do some crafting with those one day, but again, I'm just running out of time. Two and three. The sap on these is just lovely. When I plant my new area of trees at some point, I don't even know if I'm going to get to it this year because really it's bare root tree planting season now and I haven't even done the fence. It's probably next autumn. I'd like to find out what this tree is with these beautiful pine cones. Definitely get these put in. Okay, so again, very carefully I need to try and tie these on without squishing in any of my foliage, because ultimately you've just gone to a lot of trouble to cover up all of your string workings to make this wreath. You don't now want to, at the last hurdle, just go, oh yeah, look, there's string. Tie those on. Oh. Okay. And then we'll do 3 more pine cones. Ooh, running out of string. Good job, I'm nearly finished with the string. So I don't know how many of you have artificial trees or how many of you go out and buy your real tree. I don't do either. So my ex, I remember at the time I was quite surprised that I went to their house for Christmas and it was Christmas Eve and there was no tree, and I was from a family where you have a tree, don't you? Of course you do. And his mum said, can you go and get the tree? And there's me thinking we're going to get in the car and go to some garden centre and get the last ropey tree, and he merrily grabbed some secateurs and we went for a walk down around the fields looking for a particular branch. And at the time I thought, this is madness, this isn't how you get a tree. If I'd have known then that that's how I would get my tree, I wouldn't believe you. I'd be like, don't be silly. But I think that's such a wonderful, that was a family tradition they'd had for many years. And I mean, as it happens, I use the same branch every year because every year we wrestle it into the attic. But yes, I will be getting out my branch soon. And that's why I was saying to you how I love a twiggy bit. I really do love a twiggy bit. So these ones can go here. So again, I'm just finding somewhere to tuck these down. Again, taking care to hide my workings. And I'll just tie those on, and then we can add our twiggy bits. It is a shame that you can't get the fragrance that I can get here. It is it's so fresh, and you know, it's like some people go and like the scented. I mean, I don't mind a scented candle actually, especially on a dark evening. I quite like a candle. Okay, so now we're going to go for twiggy bits. I may add some feathers. What do I do with the twiggy bits? Here they are. So these are so curly whirly, but again the lichen is just lovely, and they're so curly whirly I'm not even really sure where to cut them and how to put them in, because they're not, you know, essentially with the rest of the wreath I've been doing straight bits, so I suppose I should try and make that a bit straighter. Twiggy bit like that. And again, as I have with everything else, just making sure I'm following the circular pattern so that everything's facing the same way. Some on the outside, some on the inside. But the lichen is lovely. The sharp point is definitely the important thing here, just to make sure that you can get things in with ease. She says, and then I can't get it in. Oh, I just love this. It's just so beautiful. Birch is another fantastic twig for things like this. I've seen, in fact I've got one, but mine's not as good as the ones I've seen. Some beautiful twigs that are, some beautiful wreaths that are just made from birch. Absolutely lovely. I mean, that's the thing, you can make a wreath just with one foliage. You don't have to have all of the variation. It's all about taste and style, you know, quite contemporary. Some of the more Nordic wreaths as well are not as fat and full as these traditional British ones. They're really quite skinny. And if you were looking for that sort of feel, of course you don't have to make your fan so long. You can make it, you know, a shorter fan. But I mean, yeah, the alder has a much more purple catkin than this. Which, if you're doing the reds, which I will be doing lots with holly, and sometimes if I can't get holly berries, because the nearest Christmas you get, the more holly the birds have eaten, then rose hips are a really good substitute, I find. And you can have, you know, depending on the variety of rose hips of various sizes. I've got a beautiful rose, but actually the hips on that have already had it. They've gone all soft and squidgy. Now when you're pricing something like this, if you are going to sell it, it's very easy just to say, oh, well, there's a lady down the road and she sells them for this much. That must be right. It could be, that every person who makes something will have different costs. So, for one, are you going to charge for the time it took you to make it? Because if you're a professional florist, you have to, especially if you're employing staff, you can't not take into account how long something's taken to make, because it's taken your member of staff an hour to make it, and you've got to pay her an hourly rate. Then it needs to be a considered cost. And then when you're selling anything, really, so for things like the twine and the foliage that I purchased, you don't just charge cost for that. You really should mark that up by 50%. So the hay, the twine, and the foliage that I paid for should all be marked up by 50%. Now the stuff that I didn't pay for, I still drove my car to go and get that, so I should be charging my fuel. Not only that, you should still charge the time that you spent gathering the things, because again, if you're a professional florist, you have to be paid for your time. I'm going to have to put it on the floor again to look at it. So then, if you add all those things, suddenly the price that the person down the road's doing it may seem, a bit crazy, and often it is. But then some people do it for love, not money. So it really depends if you're doing this. If you're making your own wreath, it's fine, it doesn't matter. But are you selling it because you just want a little hobby and you don't care if it makes you money or not? Or are you hoping that this is going to be a career for you? And if you're hoping it's going to be a career for you, then it is best to price things properly, because then if you price all of your products in that way, it will all make sense to you, and you won't struggle with, well, how much should that be, or what, and then asking people, well, what are you charging? Because somebody else might be quicker than me at gathering things. They might be quicker at me than making the wreath. They might have a cheaper deal for the things they buy, the string, the foliage, the hay. What I'm saying is I tend not to just pluck figures out of thin air. I do tend to actually work out how things cost. Having said that, I often will work out how much something will cost and then go, I can't charge that. And I shouldn't. I should stick to my guns. But sometimes things come out so. But then it's not fair, you see, on high street florists, because they then cannot possibly compete with people who are, doing it and not charging properly. If everybody charged accordingly, then people would have to pay the true price for things. People would be more aware, I think, of how much things cost. Anyway, I don't want you to think I'm having a rant. I'm hopefully offering some wisdom that was bestowed upon me. Okay, there we are. I'm not sure if it's finished or not. I do have, the reason I put my pine cones here, here and here is because I do have a ribbon. I have a bow. If you want to know how to make the bow, then I have a very short YouTube video on how I made this particular bow, which I will also link in the description. And I just want to find somewhere to put my bow, and then I'll have a think about feathers. Haven't quite decided yet. I'll tie my bow on in a minute because I'm not 100% sure about the positioning. So I've just sort of tucked it in at the moment. so that we can have a look. Of course, you don't have to have a bow on your wreath, but I think they do sort of finish them off quite nicely. I think the bow should be actually, see, I'm glad I didn't tie it on, because I think it should be over here instead. Well, the bow needs straightening up and tying on. And this is a bit the same as the pine cones. This is quite difficult to tie on without squashing all your foliage. I quite like some of the more contemporary, smaller sort of velvet ribbons. I quite like those. I'm not sure what I'm going to do for my own front door yet this year. I'll probably just end up with a wreath that doesn't sell on the markets. It'd be nice to think they'd all sell, and I'd have to rush out and make myself one. But I'm not that optimistic. Okay. Right. So I think there, and again I'm just going to be tucking the string underneath all of the foliage, because I don't really want to be able to see the string, and I also don't want the bit of string to, you know, tuck any of the foliage in, because I want it to all still have that loose appearance. Again, any old knot. Don't need to do it particularly tightly. It's only just to hold the bow more or less in place. Okay. There we are. There's my Christmas wreath. I hope you like it. So I don't think I'm going to add the feathers in. I think I'm going to consider this my finished wreath. So you can see I did add the feathers in the end, and I also added the grass. I managed to split it a little bit so that I have a few more pieces, and also a bit of pampas grass as well. So thank you very much for joining me today to make this. I hope you found my video interesting. Sometimes I know I do too much of this. And as I say, I hope there's a video next week. Fingers crossed. But if not, I'll see you the following week. Thanks again for watching. Bye for now.